Many advances have been made in microbial food safety to protect our food, and we're going to discuss some of those in this segment. You may have heard about irradiation, and there are some concerns about radiation, but irradiation has been extensively evaluated for over the last 50 years and approved in more than 40 countries, so it is deemed as safe. So there's no concern for consuming irradiated foods. Irradiation is actually very beneficial and provides much protection for consumers. So it does this by controlling mold and grains that can produce aflatoxin. It sterilizes spices and teas. It helps to control insects. It extends the shelf life of fresh produce. And it destroys disease-causing bacteria and fresh and frozen meat. So it really is beneficial, a beneficial technology in our food supply. So how does it work? Gamma rays from a cobalt-60 source are used, and this helps to disrupt the bacterial DNA, protein, or other structures in the bacteria. And this delays, as we look up here about extending the shelf life of fresh produce, this action here, disrupting, helps to delay the ripening of fresh fruits and vegetables. So this is why something can be picked, when it's not quite ripe, but it's almost ripe, irradiated, and then by the time it gets to us, maybe it could be thousands of miles later, it's okay. So again, the process of irradiation is just disrupting the DNA, protein, or the other structures of the bacteria. Contrary to popular belief or popular rumors or myths, irradiation does not make foods radioactive, and it does not change the taste or texture of food. So you could be consuming foods that are irradiated and you would never know. However, this symbol up here is the international symbol for foods that have undergone irradiation. So if you see this on a package, it just indicates that it has undergone irradiation, or it may be also called cold pasteurization. So again, many consumers have concerns about irradiation, but it is safe in our food supply. So no concern is made. Some other technologies. So microbial testing has helped to improve or reduce the number of illnesses in our food supply. So we have these improved testing and surveillance procedures. The HACCP plans, all those things help to prevent any outbreaks at various critical time points, and we're watching things over a long period of time, so this has helped to reduce illness. Modified atmospheric packaging, or MAP, reduces the oxygen inside a package. So any bacteria that requires oxygen, so an aerobic bacteria, oxygen requiring, would basically be killed. However, products that are packaged with MAP still need to be refrigerated, because this will help to prevent the growth of anaerobic bacteria. So anaerobic do not require oxygen. So reducing oxygen will kill aerobic, but the anaerobic bacteria are still there. So it's important to refrigerate to prevent that growth. High pressure processing, HPP, and high-powered ultrasound are used on deli meats, applesauce, orange juice. However, this is very expensive, so it's not used widely at this point. And then antimicrobial wraps and films are used to kill bacteria that may come in contact with film. So some fruits and vegetables may have this film, biodegradable film, but many of us may eat these and we never know, so they are also safe. So natural toxins in food. We often think that toxins are added. There's this whole conspiracy that things are added to our food to make it toxic. But a lot of foods actually have natural toxins. And like anything else, eating too much of one thing can be toxic. So it doesn't matter what it is, if it's an extremely healthy food or extremely unhealthy food, there's going to be some toxicity at some point. But some of these foods actually have natural toxins. So herbs and cabbages have carcinogens in them, which means they could be cancer-causing. Goitrogens, foods with cyanogens. So cyanogens are precursors to cyanide. So some of these foods might be cassava, or the fruit seeds seeds or pits of fruit. So that's why we don't eat like the pit of an avocado or of a plum or anything like that, because it does have this cyanogen in it. Potatoes contain a substance called solanine. And solanine is a narcotic-like substance. However, you can get rid of the solanine by peeling potatoes. So, just another thing to think about. And then seafood red tide toxin. This is not in all seafood, but when it's become contaminated and if you consume the seafood with the red toxin, then this could actually cause paralysis. So, summary, to avoid harm from toxins, eat all foods in moderation, treat toxins from all sources with respect, choose a variety of foods, and respect bans on seafood harvesting. So like everything else, moderation, moderation, moderation. Pesticides are also an area of concern by consumers and even farmers alike. So pesticides are important because they help to ensure the survival of our food crops. So they're killing pests, so they are somewhat needed. However, when we get concerned about the pesticides is that they can damage the environment and actually cause harm to humans. So as far as hazards to consumers, large doses have had negative effects in animals. So there aren't a lot of studies on consumers, obviously, because this would be causing harm. But the large doses that have been tested in animal studies, it's very unlikely that you would ever consume that amount as a human. So you're not going to consume that large of a dose. And we're all consuming pesticides all the time. So it's unlikely to pose a major health threat. Residues can survive processing. So, pesticide residues are on a lot of things that we eat, but they're in small enough amounts that they're not going to cause those negative hazards. There are, like everything else, some vulnerable populations. So again, people that are ill or malnourished or have compromised immune systems, and specifically infants and children. So they have their detoxifying system is immature, they're smaller body size, and they're consuming more food proportionally. So the pesticides could build up, and they just have a lower pesticide tolerance in general. Pesticides are regulated by the Environmental Protection Agency, or the EPA, and they have what's called a reference dose. And this is the maximum pesticide residues that are allowed on U.S. crops. So this is regulated. They may be 1/100th to 1/1000th of the highest dose that does not cause adverse health effects in lab animals. So again, these doses that they're testing in lab animals are very unlikely in just our normal everyday environment. There is becoming some concern that insects are becoming, the pesticides have been around so long that they're becoming resistant to those pesticides. So we need to find alternatives to more powerful pesticides, because if we use more toxic things, that probably will have a negative effect or a more negative effect in humans. So we need to find some alternatives to get rid of these insects, because we still need to have food, and we need to get rid of those insects somehow. And pesticides are one way that we do that, and to ensure our food supply. I do want to talk about briefly organic foods and pesticides. So organic foods contain no or lower levels of pesticides compared to conventionally grown products. If you see this seal, so USDA organic, a farm has to pass, or a food has to pass USDA inspections at every step of production. So not just anyone can slap on this organic food label. There are a lot of steps and hoops to jump through. Some foods may be better to buy organic, but all foods, it's very important to recognize that all foods are safe. So just because, we can wash pesticides off of our fruits and vegetables, those that require a little bit more scrubbing, you might have heard of something called the Dirty Dozen, that are more likely to have more pesticides. Those might be better to buy organic if you can afford it. But nutritionally, there's no difference. There's no nutritional differences between conventionally grown and organic fruits and vegetables. And just because something is organic, it does not mean that it's healthy. So if you can afford to buy organic, great. If you can't, not a big deal either. You're going to get the same nutrition. However, organic foods are better for the environment. They are more sustainable agricultural practices. So organic foods are good for the environment, but they're not necessarily better for us as consumers. So that's just a little food for thought. All right, animal drugs. So antibiotics are often used in livestock, just like they're used in human, to prevent infections and promote faster growth. As a result of overuse of antibiotics, there are now antibiotic-resistant bacteria, and this is true in humans as well. So we use antibiotics all the time that we become somewhat resistant. So this can also happen in livestock. Growth hormones are often used in livestock as well, specifically for meat and milk. So RBST is used to increase lean tissue growth in milk product and reduce the feed requirements. but it is safe to use. So if you see milk that says treated with RBST, animals, it's safe. It has been evaluated and it is safe to consume. Arsenic is something we're starting to hear a little bit more about. It's used to promote growth in chickens and other livestock. So, if you eat chicken or other livestock, you could get some arsenic there. But recently, there's been a lot of talk about arsenic found in rice. However, again, it's important to note that the level of arsenic in these foods is going to pose little or no risk to healthy consumers who are consuming a variety of foods and if you're consuming normal portions. So if you consume rice every single day, several times a day, there might be more concern for this arsenic in rice. But if you're consuming rice a couple times a week, probably not something that you need to, stay up late at night worrying about. So like everything else, variety and moderation is. All right, so now environmental contaminants. So a food contaminant is any substance that occurs in a food by accident, or basically anything that's in the food that's not supposed to be there. So even thinking about, like, I grew up on a farm, if you are looking at soybeans and then randomly there's a corn kernel in there, that corn kernel is a contaminant. So some examples of contaminants could be, paper in a packaging, a piece of plastic, a piece of metal, a piece of tin, anything like that. Some contaminants can be harmful if they're persistent. So if we persistently or commonly consume these contaminants, they can basically accumulate in our bodies. And then this toxicity can result if we have too much for too long of time. Mercury in seafood can be another contaminant. So as we've talked about briefly before, seafood, the recommendation, we want to consume seafood for the health benefits, but we want to limit our consumption of fish from mercury-contaminated waters, especially if you're pregnant. You do not want to consume those fish or seafood that are high in mercury. If you consume too much mercury, this can be associated with headaches, fatigue, memory loss, impaired ability to concentrate, muscle, or joint pain. So I think there's a pretty good chart in your book that talks about which food or which seafoods are higher in mercury and which ones would be better choices.